The church bell tolled, a lonely sound in the dusty Wyoming air. Each clang of the heavy iron was a hammer blow to Zara Zimmerman's heart. She stood before the fresh pile of dirt, a black veil doing little to hide the path of her tears. She made no sound. She hadn't for weeks. The whispers of the townfolk had seen to that. Such a shameful display. Mrs. Hollister's voice cut through the quiet cemetery. It was a voice designed to carry, sharp and unforgiving. 3 months he's been gone. 3 months, and still she weeps like it was yesterday. Zara's knuckles went white as she clutched the small embroidered handkerchief. It was Henry's, the last thing he'd touched before the typhoid took him, swift and cruel. He was gone, and at 26, Zara was alone. The small ranch they'd built together, their future, was now just a collection of memories and chores that never ended. Every Sunday she made this walk. Every Sunday the judgment grew louder. "A proper widow shows fortitude," another voice chimed in. "My Martha, she lost her husband at Gettysburg, never saw her shed a single tear in public." The good people of Mill Creek were heading for their Sunday dinners, their duty to God fulfilled for another week. They left Zara behind, a solitary figure in black, swallowed by a grief they refused to understand. She didn't see the man standing under the shade of a tall cottonwood tree. She didn't see his eyes, hard as granite, narrow as he listened to the cruel words. His name was Logan Frost. He'd been in town for 3 days. It was long enough to know he didn't like the people in it. He'd taken a job breaking horses out at the Rockingham Ranch, hoping to outrun the ghosts that had chased him all the way from Montana. He was 32, and he'd seen enough death to know its true face. What he saw in Zara was the real thing, raw, honest pain. As the last of the churchgoers vanished down the road, Zara's strength finally gave out. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the dirt beside the grave, her shoulders shaking with sobs that were all the more heartbreaking for being silent. The sight tore a hole right through Logan. He hadn't planned to interfere. He hadn't planned on anything but minding his own business. But his feet were moving before he'd made a conscious decision, the dry ground crunching under his boots. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that didn't startle. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. Zara jumped, her hands flying to her face to wipe away the evidence of her sorrow. She scrambled to her feet, a mess of apologies and trembling words. I was leaving. I didn't mean to be a bother." Logan pulled off his hat. His hair was thick and brown, curling just a bit where it met his collar. "You're no bother," he said, and his voice was firm. "And those folks had no right at all." Her cheeks flushed under the veil. "You heard them?" "I did," he said. "And they're dead wrong." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean bandana, holding it out to her. "My ma used to say tears are just the heart's way of speaking when words won't come." Zara looked at the offered cloth, then at him. She hesitated for a moment before taking it. "Thank you, Mr. Logan Frost, just hired on at the Rockingham." "Wallace McCreary's place," she said, her voice a little steadier. "He's a good man." She dabbed at her eyes. "I'm Zara Zimmerman." "I know who you are, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said gently. He glanced at the simple wooden headstone. "Don't let them shame you for grieving. It ain't natural for a body to hold all that sorrow inside. It'll poison you." Fresh tears welled in her eyes, spilling over. "Everyone keeps telling me I need to be stronger." "Being strong ain't about not feeling," Logan said, his voice soft, but with an edge of steel. He took a step closer. He could see the tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. He reached out, his touch surprisingly gentle, and lifted the edge of her veil. With his thumb, he wiped a tear from her skin. "Cry with me, Mrs. Zimmerman. There's no shame in it." And just like that, the dam broke. Something in his eyes, a deep well of understanding she hadn't seen in anyone, gave her permission. For the first time in 3 long months, Zara truly wept. Not alone in her empty cabin, but in the presence of a stranger who offered not judgment, but a shared silence. Her legs felt weak, ready to give out again, but his hands were there, catching her elbows, holding her steady. His touch was firm, supportive, but it didn't cross any lines. It was just there. "I miss him so much," she whispered, the words ragged. "I know," Logan said. And the way he said it, the absolute certainty in his tone, sent a shiver through her. He sounded like a man who knew exactly what she meant. He sounded like a man who knew what it was to lose everything. When the storm of her grief finally passed, leaving her exhausted and empty, Logan walked her to her small wagon. He helped her onto the seat with a careful hand. "You'll be all right to drive home?" Zara nodded, pulling her composure around her like a shawl. "I do it every week, but thank you, Mr. Frost. Your kindness, it means more than you can possibly know. If you ever need a hand out at your place, I'm free on Sundays," he offered. He said it quickly, as if to downplay the offer. "Just as a neighbor, no strings." "Oh, I couldn't possibly impose." "It's no imposition," he insisted. "Just an offer." He stepped back and put his hat back on. "Safe journey, Mrs. Zimmerman." As she flicked the reins and the wagon lurched forward, she glanced back. Logan was still standing there, a tall silhouette against the harsh afternoon sun. He watched until the road bent and she was out of sight. And for the first time since Henry died, Zara felt something other than the crushing weight of her loss. It was a tiny flicker of warmth, a feeling that both scared her and gave her a strange, unfamiliar sense of hope. Logan Frost was a man of his word. The next Sunday, just as the afternoon sun was starting its long slide toward the horizon, he rode into her yard. The Zimmerman ranch was a modest place. 40 acres, a sturdy cabin, a barn that had seen better days, and a few horses that looked at him with mild curiosity. He found Zara in the garden, on her knees in the dirt, her black dress smudged with soil. She was pulling weeds with a vengeance. "Afternoon, Mrs. Zimmerman," he called out, swinging down from his horse. She looked up, and he saw a flash of genuine surprise in her blue eyes. "Mr. Frost, I didn't actually expect you to come. I told you I would." He tied his horse to the hitching post and nodded toward the barn. "That roof looks like it could use a few patches before the snow flies. If you're agreeable, I thought I might take a look." Zara hesitated. She was a widow, alone. Having a single man, a stranger no less, working on her property. She knew what the gossips in town would make of it. But the roof did need fixing, and the money for a hired hand simply wasn't there. "I'd be grateful," she said at last. "But you must let me fix you supper for your trouble." Logan tipped his hat. "That sounds more than fair, ma'am." And so began a routine. Every Sunday, Logan would ride out after his work at the Rockingham was done. He'd tackle whatever repair was most pressing, a broken fence post, a loose shutter, a stubborn water pump. And afterward, they would sit on her small porch and share a simple meal. Their talk was stilted at first, full of polite questions and careful answers. But slowly, week by week, the formality melted away, replaced by something that felt like friendship. "Henry always wanted to expand the chicken coop," Zara said one afternoon, sipping lemonade. Logan had spent the better part of the day restringing a section of barbed wire fence. "We had so many plans." "He sounds like he was a good man," Logan said, his voice quiet. "The best," she whispered, her gaze distant. "We grew up together, married when I was 18. I can't imagine. I never imagined a life without him." Logan nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I lost someone too," he said, his voice suddenly rough. "Different circumstances, but the emptiness, it feels the same, I reckon." Zara turned to look at him, really look at him. She saw the lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, lines that had nothing to do with a hard day's work. "Who was it?" she asked softly. "If you don't mind me asking." He was quiet for a long moment. "My wife, Caroline," he said, his voice thick with a pain that was still raw. "And our little girl, Emma, diphtheria, took them both inside a week. That was 5 years ago." "Oh, Logan," Zara breathed. Without thinking, she reached out and laid her hand on his. It was a simple, comforting gesture, but it felt momentous. "I'm so terribly sorry." "That's why I understood," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "When I saw you at the cemetery, because I've shed my share of tears." Their eyes locked, and in that instant, a silent understanding passed between them. It was a bond forged in shared loss, a recognition of the same hollow space carved out of their hearts. Neither of them moved. The world seemed to shrink to just the two of them on that small porch, the sun setting behind them. The moment was shattered by the rattle of an approaching wagon. Zara snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned. The wagon belonged to Eunice Pettigrew, the town's self-appointed moral compass and most notorious gossip. Mrs. Pettigrew didn't just pass by. She steered her horse directly into the yard, her eyes scanning everything, from the repaired fence to the 2 empty plates on the small table between Zara and Logan. Her questions were like tiny, sharp needles, probing and relentless. By the time she finally left, promising to remember them both in her prayers, Zara's face was burning with humiliation. "I am so sorry," Zara said, her voice tight. "You shouldn't be subjected to that because of me. Perhaps it would be best if—" "Don't," Logan interrupted, his voice low and sharp. "Don't you dare say it. I don't give a damn what that old biddy thinks." His jaw was tight. "But your reputation, I shouldn't have put you in this position." "It's not that," Zara said, looking away toward the darkening fields. I've come to value your company, Mr. Frost, more than I should, perhaps." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. Logan took a step closer. "There's no timetable for grief, Zara, and there's no rule book that says when it's all right to feel something new." "Isn't there?" she whispered. "Everyone in town seems to have a copy." "Everyone in town isn't standing in your boots," he said. He reached out and gently turned her face toward him. "Or mine." For a heart-stopping moment, Zara thought he was going to kiss her. The thought sent a jolt of equal parts terror and a wild, unfamiliar thrill through her. She realized with a shock that she wanted him to, but he didn't. He held her gaze for another second, then stepped back, putting a respectable distance between them once more. "I should be heading back," he said, his voice suddenly gruff. "I'll see you next Sunday," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. She watched him ride away, a storm of conflicting emotions churning inside her. He was the first person to see her, truly see her, since Henry died. But what if the town was right? What if it was too soon? What if she was betraying the memory of the man she loved? The doubt was a cold knot in her stomach. And as Logan disappeared over the rise, she noticed something odd. A small, carved symbol on the pommel of his saddle. A bird of some kind, an eagle or a hawk, its talons clenched. It seemed out of place for a simple ranch hand. It looked almost like a brand. The following Sunday, Logan didn't come. Zara tried to tell herself it was for the best. She told herself that Mrs. Pettigrew's visit had made him realize how foolish their arrangement was. She told herself she was relieved. But the feeling that settled in her chest wasn't relief. It was a heavy, sinking disappointment. She had grown to depend on his visits, on his quiet strength and easy company. She had started to look forward to Sundays for the first time in months. Monday passed with no word, then Tuesday. By Wednesday, Zara had forced herself to accept it. He was gone. He had decided to distance himself, and she couldn't blame him. She was a widow, still drowning in her grief, with the whole town watching her every move. She was a complication a man with his own painful past didn't need. She was in the hen house collecting the day's eggs when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Her heart gave a ridiculous leap of hope. She hurried outside, wiping her hands on her apron, a half-formed smile on her face. But it wasn't Logan riding into her yard. It was Wallace McCreary, the owner of the Rockingham. He was an older man, in his 60s, with a kind, weathered face. He'd been one of the few people who had shown her genuine sympathy after Henry's death. "Afternoon, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, dismounting from his horse with a slight groan. "Mr. McCreary," she greeted him, her smile faltering. She set down her basket of eggs. "What brings you all the way out here?" His expression was grim. "It's about Logan Frost." Zara's blood ran cold. "There was an accident," McCreary said, his voice heavy. "Sunday morning, one of our new stallions, a mean-tempered brute, threw him hard, right into a fence post." He shook his head. "Doc Patterson says he's got a bad concussion and a couple of broken ribs." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Will he be all right?" "Doc says he'll pull through, but he's hurting something fierce, and he's stubborn as a mule. This morning he was trying to get on his horse, said he had to get word to you that he wouldn't be coming." McCreary sighed. "I told the damn fool I'd ride out myself." "Thank you," Zara managed to say, her mind racing. An accident, a bad-tempered stallion. It sounded plausible. It sounded like the kind of thing that happened on a ranch. But a cold sliver of doubt wedged itself in her heart. She thought of the whispers, the glares in town. She thought of how Logan had stood up for her. Had someone decided to teach him a lesson? Would it be proper for me to visit him?" she asked, the words rushing out. McCreary's face softened. "I reckon kindness is more important than propriety right now, son. My wife is looking after him at our place. There's no cause for gossip. You're welcome to come any time." Zara didn't even hesitate. The next morning, she hitched her wagon, packing a basket with fresh-baked bread, a jar of her best preserves, and some dried herbs she knew were good for pain and healing. The drive to the Rockingham was 5 miles, and every turn of the wagon wheels was filled with a growing dread. What if it wasn't an accident? What if this was her fault? She found him in a small bunkhouse near the main ranch house. He was propped up on a pile of pillows, his face pale under his tan. A thick bandage was wrapped around his chest, and a nasty bruise was blooming on his temple. "You came," he said, his voice weak, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Of course I came," she said, her voice catching. She moved to his bedside, her eyes taking in the extent of his injuries. "You gave everyone a terrible scare." "Not my finest hour," he admitted, with a wry, pained smile. "That stallion had some opinions about being ridden. Mr. McCreary told me you were trying to ride out to my place. That was a foolish thing to do, Logan." She busied herself unpacking the basket, arranging the items on the small bedside table, needing something to do with her hands. His hand shot out and caught hers, stopping her nervous movements. "I didn't want you to think I'd just disappeared," he said, his voice intense. "I gave you my word I'd be there on Sundays." The touch of his calloused fingers sent a jolt of warmth straight up her arm. "Your health is more important than any promise," she said softly. It was the first time she had said his name out loud, and it felt strangely intimate on her tongue. His eyes darkened, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "Hearing you say my name," he murmured, "almost makes the pain worth it." Just then, Mrs. McCreary bustled in, a kind, motherly woman with shrewd eyes. She took in the scene, their clasped hands, the look on their faces, and her expression softened. She said nothing about it, simply offered Zara a cup of tea and gave a brisk, no-nonsense update on Logan's condition. Zara began visiting every day. The McCreary's presence acted as a shield against any potential gossip, but Zara found she cared less and less what anyone thought. She brought Logan food, read to him from books she found in the McCreary's parlor, and they talked. They talked for hours. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his time as a cavalry scout in the war, and about the brief, shining happiness he'd found with his wife and daughter in Montana. His stories were tinged with a deep, abiding sadness, but also with a quiet strength that Zara found herself admiring more and more. In turn, she opened up to him about Henry, about their shared dreams of filling the small ranch with children, a dream that had never come to pass. She told him about her loneliness, her fear of the future. "What will you do with the ranch?" he asked her one afternoon. It had been 3 weeks since his accident, and he was finally starting to mend. He could sit up for longer periods, and had even taken a few halting steps around the small room. "I don't know," Zara confessed. "I can manage the day-to-day, but the bigger tasks, winter coming." She sighed. "I've had offers to buy it, but it was Henry's dream. Selling it feels like I'm letting him go completely." Logan was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "Honoring his memory and letting go of the pain aren't the same thing, Zara. You can hold on to the good things without letting the grief drown you." "Is that what you did?" she asked softly. "After Caroline and Emma." His eyes took on a distant, haunted look. "Not at first. For 2 years I just wandered, drank too much, picked fights in saloons. Then one morning, I woke up in a jail cell in Denver, and I realized they would have hated seeing me like that. The people we lose," he said, his eyes meeting hers, "they live on in how we choose to live, not in how long we mourn." His words struck a chord deep inside her. Was she honoring Henry by clinging to her sorrow like a shield, or was she just hiding from life? The question echoed in her mind long after she left the Rockingham that day. As she drove her wagon home, she passed by the fence post Logan had supposedly been thrown against. She slowed the horse, her eyes scanning the area. The post was thick, sturdy cedar. It was splintered, a fresh, ugly gash in the wood. But something was wrong. On the ground, half hidden in the tall grass, something glinted in the late afternoon sun, a small metal flask. It wasn't Logan's. She'd never seen him with one. She got down from the wagon, her heart pounding, and picked it up. It was cheap, dented tin, and it smelled faintly of whiskey. A cold certainty settled in her stomach. A bad-tempered stallion didn't carry a flask of whiskey. This was no accident. Someone had attacked Logan, and they had done it to send a message. To her. 6 weeks after the accident, Logan was finally well enough to ride again. He was leaner, and he moved with a new stiffness, but the strength was returning to his eyes. That first Sunday, he rode out to her ranch just as he had before. There was no discussion, no need for words. It was an unspoken promise fulfilled. They worked together in the garden, replanting a section that had been trampled by a stray cow. The comfortable silence between them was filled with a new tension, a new awareness. Their hands brushed together more than once, and each time the touch lingered for a heart-stopping second longer than it should have. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the yard, Logan finally broke the silence. He put down his trowel and turned to face her. "Zara," he began, his voice steady, though she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "I care for you, more than just a friend. I know it hasn't been long since Henry, and I would never, ever try to replace him. But I have to be honest with you about how I feel. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a chaotic mix of fear and a wild, soaring hope. "Logan, You don't have to answer," he said quickly, holding up a hand. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. I respect you too much to play games." Before she could find the words to respond, the sound of approaching riders shattered the moment. 3 of them. They rode with a purpose that set every nerve in Zara's body on edge. She didn't recognize any of them. Logan immediately tensed, his body shifting almost imperceptibly, placing himself slightly in front of her. It was a protective, instinctual movement. "Are you expecting company?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "No," she whispered, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The men reined in their horses in a cloud of dust, deliberately trampling a row of her newly planted beans. The leader was a hard-faced man with a jagged scar that pulled one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer. He didn't bother to dismount. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, his voice oily and unpleasant. "My name is Jacob Harlow. These are my associates." He gestured vaguely at the other 2 men. "I represent the Western Pacific Railroad Company. I'm here to talk about purchasing your property." Zara drew herself up to her full height. "I've already told the last man who came by that my ranch is not for sale, Mr. Harlow." Harlow's smile was cold and empty. "Perhaps you didn't understand the generosity of our previous offer. We're prepared to give you $500 for the whole parcel. It's more than generous for a piece of dirt like this." Logan stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but it carried a deadly weight. "The lady said she's not interested." Harlow's cold eyes shifted to Logan, sizing him up. "And who are you? The new hired hand?" "I'm a friend," Logan said, his voice flat. "And I think you should get back on that road and ride away before you wear out your welcome." The air crackled with tension. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Harlow reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Our final offer is in here, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, his eyes still locked on Logan. "The railroad is coming through this valley. Make no mistake about that. All your neighbors have already sold. It would be unwise for you to be the one holdout." He tossed the envelope into the dirt at Zara's feet. "We'll be back in 1 week for your answer." As they wheeled their horses around and rode off, Zara began to tremble, a mixture of rage and raw fear. $500. That's less than half of what this land is worth. They know I'm alone. They think they can just bully me into giving it up. Logan bent down and picked up the envelope, his expression grim. "These aren't just bullies, Zara. These are dangerous men." He looked at her, his eyes dark with worry. "Is it true? Have all your neighbors sold?" "The Hendersons sold last month," she admitted. "And I heard the Clarks were thinking about it. But this land, this was Henry's dream. Our dream." "What would Henry want for you now?" Logan asked gently. "Would he want you to fight a battle you can't win, out of loyalty to a memory? Or would he want you to be safe, to find a new happiness?" The question hung in the air as darkness fell around them. What would Henry want? For the first time, the answer seemed clear. He would want her to live. Not just to survive, but to truly live. That night, long after Logan had reluctantly left with a promise to check on her the next day, Zara sat on her porch and looked up at the star-dusted sky. She spoke to Henry, her voice a soft whisper on the night air. "I think I'm ready to let go," she said. "Not of you, never of you, but of the pain." A tear slipped down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of despair. "There's someone, Henry. Someone who understands. Someone who was kind to me when everyone else was so cruel. I think you would have liked him." She went inside and, driven by a sudden impulse, pulled out the old wooden chest where Henry kept his papers. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. A sign, maybe. Her fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound journal she hadn't looked at since he died. She opened it. Most of it was just notes about the ranch, prices for feed, plans for a new barn. But tucked into the very last page was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't in Henry's handwriting. It was a crude map showing her property and a spot marked with an X right over the location of the old, dried-up creek bed. And below the map, a single cryptic phrase was scrawled, "Where the black rock weeps." The hair on her arm stood on end. Henry hadn't died of typhoid, and the railroad didn't just want her land for a set of tracks. They were looking for something. Something Henry had found first. The next week was a nightmare. Harlow and his men didn't wait for their deadline. They began a campaign of intimidation. One morning, Zara woke up to find her entire chicken coop torn apart, the chickens scattered or dead. Another day, the well was fouled with oil. The message was clear: sell or be forced out. The townsfolk who had once whispered about her grief now whispered about her stubbornness. She was holding up progress. She was standing in the way of the town's prosperity. Even Reverend Simmons paid her a visit, gently suggesting that perhaps it was God's will that she move on. "You can't let them do this," Logan said, his voice tight with a barely controlled fury. He had spent the morning helping her repair the coop. "But you have to decide what's worth fighting for, Zara." "I don't know what to do," she cried, finally breaking down. This land was everything to Henry. But is it worth this? Is it worth fighting the whole town? She showed him the map she had found in Henry's journal. "What does it mean, Logan?" "Where the black rock weeps." Logan studied the crude map, his brow furrowed. "I don't know. But Henry must have found something. Something he didn't want them to have." He took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. We're in this together, but it has to be your choice." His unwavering support gave her the strength she needed. When Harlow and his men returned at the end of the week, they weren't alone. They had brought Sheriff Mills with them, and a small crowd of townsfolk, including Mrs. Pettigrew and the Reverend, who had come to witness her surrender. "We've come for your answer, Mrs. Zimmerman," Harlow announced, a smug look on his face. Zara stood on her porch, her back straight, Logan a solid, reassuring presence beside her. She looked at the faces in the crowd, some hostile, some impatient, a few sympathetic but afraid to show it. She looked at the land, her home. Then she looked at Logan. "I've decided to sell," she said, her voice clear and strong. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Harlow smiled, a predator's grin. "But," Zara continued, her voice ringing out, "not for your insulting offer of $500. The fair market value for this land, considering the timber and water rights, is $1,000. I will not accept a penny less." Harlow's smile vanished. "That's not the deal on the table." "Then there is no deal," Zara replied, shocking even herself with her newfound courage. "And before you and your men decide to get any more ideas about persuasion, you should know something. I found my husband's journal. I know he was meeting with your surveyors. And I found the letter he wrote to the territorial governor, detailing your strong-arm tactics and your suspiciously low offers to all the ranchers in this valley." "Sheriff Mills," she said, turning her gaze on the lawman, "already has a copy." The sheriff, who had been looking smug, suddenly went pale. He hadn't expected this. He stammered, "Now, Mrs. Zimmerman, there's no need for—" "I do indeed have that letter, Mr. Harlow," Logan cut in, his voice like ice. "Along with sworn statements from the Hendersons and the Clarks about the threats made against their families. I also have a doctor's report from my accident, noting that my injuries were more consistent with being struck by a blunt object than being thrown from a horse." Funny thing, that. A tense, heavy silence fell over the yard. Logan shifted his weight, and his coat fell open just enough to reveal the butt of the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. Harlow stared at him, a new, calculating look in his eyes. He finally broke into a cold, humorless smile. $900, final offer. Zara didn't hesitate. $950, and I'll need 30 days to vacate the premises. Harlow's eye twitched. After a long, tense moment, he gave a curt nod. Done. Have the papers drawn up. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men and the stunned crowd trailing behind him. As they disappeared down the road, Logan turned to Zara, a look of pure admiration on his face. You were magnificent. I was terrified, she admitted, letting out a shaky breath. But it felt right. Henry wouldn't have wanted me to be a victim. She looked out at the land. But what now? And what did that map mean? I think it's time we found out, Logan said, his expression serious. Before we sign any papers. They went to the old dry creek bed at the far edge of the property. It was a rocky, desolate place. They searched for hours, finding nothing but sun-bleached rocks and thorny scrub brush. It's no use, Zara said, sinking onto a large boulder, discouraged. Maybe it was nothing. Logan was running his hand along the face of a large, dark rock outcropping near where she sat. It was almost black, a stark contrast to the surrounding sandstone. Zara, he said, his voice low and urgent. Look at this. She went to him. Water, impossibly, was seeping from tiny cracks in the black rock, glistening in the sun like tears. And where the water ran down the rock face, it left behind a thick, black, oily residue. Where the black rock weeps, Zara whispered in awe. Logan pulled a knife from his belt and scraped at the residue. It came away in a thick, sticky gob. He sniffed it. Oil, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Black gold. Henry didn't just find a little seep, Zara. There's a fortune under this land. That's what the railroad is after. Not a right-of-way. They want the oil rights. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Henry had been murdered. Not for his land, but for the secret it held. The typhoid outbreak. Had it even been real? Or just a convenient way to explain a sudden death? The town doctor was a known drunk, easily bribed or intimidated. Suddenly, the whole town's behavior made a terrifying kind of sense. They weren't just gossips. They were accomplices, either through greed or fear. They killed him, Zara whispered, her blood running cold. They killed Henry for this. Yes, Logan said, his face a grim mask. And they're not going to let you just walk away with a piece of paper and $900. They'll find a way to get rid of you before that 30 days is up. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. We need to get out of here. Tonight. They worked frantically as darkness fell, packing only what they could carry in Zara's wagon. Clothes, food, the small box of money she had hidden under a floorboard, and Henry's journal. Every sound from outside made them jump. Every hoot of an owl, every rustle of the wind in the cottonwoods sounded like approaching hoofbeats. Where will we go? Zara asked, her voice trembling as she loaded a sack of flour into the wagon. South, Logan said. Toward Denver. It's a big city. We can get lost there, figure out our next move. He stopped what he was doing and came to her, taking her by the shoulders. Zara, I have to tell you something. My name. It isn't Logan Frost. Zara stared at him, confused. My real name is Logan Kane, he said, his voice low and strained. And my wife and daughter, they didn't die of diphtheria. They were murdered by Jacob Harlow. The world spun. What? It was in Montana, a land dispute just like this one. I was a U.S. Marshal at the time. I was investigating the railroad. Harlow found out. He set fire to our cabin while I was away. Caroline and Emma, they never made it out. His voice broke. and for the first time, Zara saw tears in the eyes of this strong, quiet man. I resigned my commission, and I've been hunting him ever since. I tracked him here, to Mill Creek. I knew he was targeting the ranchers in this valley. I was watching Henry's place, trying to figure out a way to warn him. But I was too late. I found him the day after he died. It wasn't typhoid, Zara. It was poison. Zara sank onto a nearby crate, the weight of his confession crushing her. He wasn't just a kind stranger. He was a man on a mission of vengeance, and she was standing right in the middle of it. When I saw you at the cemetery, he continued, his voice regaining its strength, all I wanted to do was protect you. But I brought this danger to your door. The accident with the horse, that was Harlow's men, a warning to me, to stay away from you. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. How could I? How could I tell a grieving widow that her husband was murdered, and that the man trying to comfort her was a liar with a death wish? He knelt in front of her, taking her hands. But we don't have time for lies anymore. Harlow will be back. He won't risk letting you leave this valley alive, not now that you've forced his hand. We have to leave. Now. Just as he spoke, the sound they had been dreading echoed through the night. The thunder of multiple horses riding hard. They were coming. Logan pulled his Colt, his face set in grim lines. Get in the barn, he ordered. Bar the door. Don't come out, no matter what you hear. No, Zara cried, grabbing his arm. I'm not leaving you. You have to, he yelled, his eyes wild. This is my fight. But it was too late. The riders burst into the yard, surrounding the cabin. It was Harlow, with at least a dozen of his men. And with them was Sheriff Mills. Evening, Mrs. Zimmerman, Harlow called out, his voice dripping with false civility. Leaving so soon. Our deal was for 30 days. The deal's off, Harlow, Logan shouted back from the cover of the porch. I figured as much, Harlow laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. And I see you found yourself a protector, a man who looks remarkably like a disgraced ex-marshal I once knew in Montana. Logan Kane. I thought I smelled a rat. He drew his own pistol. No matter. The girl was a loose end anyway. Once you're both dead, the good doctor will sign a death certificate. A tragic murder-suicide, the sheriff will rule. A grieving widow and her lover. So sad. The first gunshot cracked through the night, splintering the wood of the porch pillar next to Logan's head. He fired back, and the yard erupted into a chaos of gunfire and shouting. Zara screamed as a bullet tore through the cabin window, shattering glass. Logan shoved her to the floor. Stay down! He was a different man, not the quiet ranch hand, but a seasoned fighter, moving with a deadly economy of motion, firing his pistol with a calm, practiced aim. He took down 2 of Harlow's men before they were forced to take cover behind the water trough. But they were hopelessly outnumbered. Bullets chewed through the thin walls of the cabin. It was a death trap. The cellar! Zara screamed over the din. There's a door under the rug. They scrambled for it, Logan providing covering fire as Zara tore back the rug and yanked open the heavy wooden trapdoor. They tumbled down the dusty steps into the cool, damp darkness below, just as a hail of bullets ripped through the floorboards where they had been standing. They were trapped. The cellar was small, with stone walls and no other exit. Above them, they could hear the heavy boots of Harlow's men stomping through the cabin, overturning furniture, searching for them. They'll find the door any second, Zara whispered, her body trembling with terror. Logan reloaded his pistol in the darkness, the quiet clicks of the cylinder sounding unnaturally loud. I have 4 shots left, he said, his voice grim. I can take 2 more of them with me when they open that door. He turned to her, and even in the near-total blackness, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. Zara, I'm sorry. I never wanted this for you. Don't, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Don't be sorry. You're the only person who's been honest with me in months." She thought of Henry's map, the oil. It was all so much bigger than her grief. It was about greed and corruption and a kind of evil she had never imagined. And in that dark, terrifying moment, she knew she would rather die here, with this man, than live a life of fear. "There is another way out," she said suddenly, an old memory surfacing. Henry was always worried about fires. He dug a tunnel. From the back of the cellar, it comes out in the old creek bed. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through Logan. "Where?" They felt their way along the back wall in the darkness, their hands searching the cold, rough stone. Zara's fingers found it, a section of wall where the stones were loose. They clawed at the rocks, pulling them free, revealing a dark, narrow opening. It was barely big enough to crawl through. Above them, they heard a triumphant shout. They had found the trap door. "Go!" Logan urged, pushing her toward the tunnel. "I'll hold them off." "We go together," she insisted, grabbing his hand and pulling him after her. They crawled into the suffocating darkness of the narrow tunnel, dirt and rocks scraping their skin. Behind them they heard the cellar door crash open, followed by a roar of frustration and rage from Harlow. Shots rang out, bullets thudding into the dirt behind them. They scrambled forward, crawling on their hands and knees, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. They emerged, gasping, into the cool night air, hidden in the shadows of the dry creek bed. The cabin was ablaze, Harlow's men having set it on fire to smoke them out. The entire yard was illuminated by the terrible, roaring flames. "My home," Zara whispered in horror. "It's just wood," Logan said, pulling her along. "We have to keep moving." But as they started to run, a figure stepped out from behind the black rock outcropping. It was Sheriff Mills, his pistol leveled at them. "End of the line," he said, his voice shaking. He was a coward, not a killer, but he was trapped, his corruption exposed. Before he could pull the trigger, a rifle shot cracked from the ridge above them. The sheriff cried out and crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Logan and Zara looked up to see a figure on horseback silhouetted against the flames. It was Wallace McCreary, a smoking rifle in his hands. And behind him were a dozen more riders, the hands from the Rockingham, all armed. "I got worried when you didn't come back from your visit, Logan," McCreary called down. "Figured you might have run into some trouble with our new railroad friends." Harlow and his remaining men, caught between Logan and the Rockingham riders, threw down their guns. It was over. 6 months later, Zara stood beside Logan in a small church in Denver. Her dress was a simple, hopeful blue. The same townsfolk who had once judged her were now facing justice, their conspiracy of silence and greed brought to light by a territorial investigation sparked by Henry's letter and Logan's testimony. The oil rights to her land, now legally hers, had made her a wealthy woman, but she had left all of it behind, selling the property to an honest developer and donating a large portion of the money to found a home for widows and orphans in Cheyenne. She had kept only enough for a fresh start. Before leaving Wyoming for good, they had visited the cemetery one last time. Zara placed wildflowers on Henry's grave. Logan stood beside her, his hand resting on a new, simple stone they had commissioned, one that read, "Caroline and Emma Kane, beloved." "Thank you," Zara said softly, her words for both the husband she had lost and the man she had found, "for teaching me that a heart can hold both grief and joy." Logan took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "And thank you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion, "for reminding me that the bravest thing a person can do is not to hide from the pain, but to share it." As they rode south, away from the ghosts and the ashes, toward a future they would build together, Zara felt a profound sense of peace. The past would always be a part of their story, but it no longer held them captive. Their new life waited just over the horizon, a life forged in fire and truth, hand in hand with the man who had seen her tears and taught her how to live again. If you were on the edge of your seat through Zara and Logan's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because you won't want to miss the incredible tales we have coming up next.